he never thought walking away would come back to haunt him. At the time, it felt like freedom. It felt like choosing a better future. But choices made in silence, in selfishness, always find their way back. He didn't expect her to rise. He didn't believe she ever could. When he left, he saw a weak woman crying in a kitchen that smelled like burnt rice and unpaid bills. 15 years later, standing in the middle of a glowing office tower, his heart pounding in disbelief, he saw her again, but she wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't begging. She wasn't broken. She was powerful, poised, and untouchable. And he was no longer the man in control. Years ago, they lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment where the walls were thin and the winter wind crawled in through broken windows. He was a man with dreams far bigger than his wallet, and she was a woman who believed in him when nobody else did. Mornings began with cold showers and instant coffee. She packed his lunch with stale bread and a note that always said, "Keep going, I believe in you." He'd kiss her cheek and promise, "One day, you'll have everything you deserve." But as months dragged into years, the strain of poverty crept into his bones. The promises he made began to feel like lies. Not because he didn't mean them, but because he wasn't sure he could ever keep them. She worked long hours at a nursing home, folding bed sheets and pushing wheelchairs, her back sore and eyes heavy, while he tried business after business that crumbled before they even took off. Late at night, they'd sit on their torn couch, holding hands in silence, their hearts beating in the rhythm of shared disappointment. Sometimes she cried when he couldn't see, muffling sobs into her pillow. He knew she was tired, but she never said a word that would make him feel like less of a man. She carried his weight without asking anything in return. Until the night everything changed that he came home one evening, his eyes dark and his shoulders stiffer than usual. She was cooking rice and lentils again. It was all they could afford. He didn't speak at first. Just dropped his bag, took off his shoes, and stared at the wall. She turned, wiped her hands on her apron, and asked softly, "Bad day?" He looked at her, really looked. Her face, once glowing with laughter, was pale and worn. Her hands, once soft and playful, now cracked and dry. And in that moment, he hated his life. Hated the tiny apartment. Hated the smell of struggle in every room. Hated how far he had fallen from the man he wanted to be. And worst of all, he blamed her. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice low but sharp. She blinked, confused. "Do what?" He looked away. "This. Us. This life. I'm done." Her breath caught in her throat. "You mean, you're leaving?" He nodded, avoiding her eyes. "I've got an opportunity. In the city. Big investors. I can't drag you along with me. It's better this way." She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "But we said we'd do this together. I stood by you when you had nothing." He didn't respond. Just picked up his bag again. "Sometimes love isn't enough," he whispered. That night, he walked out into the cold, leaving her standing barefoot on the kitchen tiles. She didn't run after him. She didn't scream. She just stared at the closed door, as if waiting for it to open again. But it never did. Days passed. Then weeks. Then years. The silence he left behind grew into something sharp and hollow inside her. In the beginning, she still checked the door. Still hoped for a letter, a message, anything. But time has a cruel way of teaching people to stop expecting things. She sold her wedding ring to cover rent. Took double shifts. Skipped meals. Some nights, she fell asleep on the floor, too tired to make it to bed. Friends drifted away, unsure what to say. Her family had warned her before marrying him, he talks sweet, but he's a runner. She hated how right they'd been. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small flame kept burning. Not for him, but for herself. The first time she smiled again was 6 months after he left. A patient at the nursing home told her, "You have a gentle soul. Don't let it break." That night, she looked at herself in the mirror and said out loud, "You don't need him to survive. You never did." And with those words, she decided that her story wasn't going to end like this. Not crying over a man who chose money over loyalty. Not buried under the weight of someone else's betrayal, but the pain didn't disappear. It shaped her. It hardened her heart just enough to stop her from falling apart. And as the seasons changed and her hair grew longer, so did her determination. One small decision at a time, one long night at a time, she began to rise. The man who left her had no idea what he had started. He thought he walked away from weakness. But what he truly walked away from was strength waiting to awaken. The first few weeks after he left felt like falling through darkness. There were moments she didn't know what day it was. Moments when she'd wake up thinking he was still beside her, reaching out only to find a cold, empty bed. The house didn't feel like home anymore. Every corner whispered memories, his laugh echoing faintly in the kitchen, the worn couch cushion where he used to sit, the drawer still holding a few of his socks. She couldn't bear to touch them. Not yet. It was as if the world had gone silent, and in that silence, she found herself drowning in questions. Why wasn't she enough? How could someone just leave without looking back? What did she do wrong? But questions never paid the rent. Regret didn't fill the fridge. Grief didn't keep the lights on. And so, even with a heart heavy as stone, she forced herself out of bed each morning. Her body moved like a machine: shower, uniform, coffee, bus stop. The nursing home welcomed her not with kindness but routine. Wheelchairs to push, medicine to administer, sheets to change. It was brutal work. Patients died. New ones came. The cycle didn't care about her broken heart. And maybe that was a blessing. Because in those moments, tending to others' pain distracted her from her OWN.AT night, the silence returned. Lonelier than ever. Her phone stayed dry, no calls, no messages. The few friends she had slowly drifted away. It wasn't malicious. They just didn't know what to say. People aren't taught how to comfort someone abandoned. It's easier to say, "Move on," than to sit beside someone in silence while they break. She ate alone, worked alone, cried alone. The neighbors didn't ask questions. And she didn't offer answers. She became invisible, even to herself. Then came the first eviction notice. A yellow paper taped to her door like a slap across the face. Rent overdue. She stared at it for almost 10 minutes before tearing it down, not out of denial, but defiance. She wouldn't let the walls she held together fall apart now. She gathered her courage and went straight to her boss the next morning. "I need more hours," she said firmly. He looked surprised. "You already work 6 days a week." She didn't blink. "Make it 7. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Double shifts start next week." The extra shifts meant aching legs and blistered feet. It meant less sleep, less time to breathe. But it also meant one more month with a roof over her head. She began skipping meals to stretch groceries. Canned soup became dinner. Day-old bread her breakfast. Her clothes, once neatly ironed, began to fade and tear, but she stitched them up by hand, refusing to spend a single extra dollar. Every penny was precious now, and yet, within the exhaustion, something began to shift. There was a strength growing in her bones. A quiet, stubborn force that refused to let her collapse. She had nothing. No husband. No backup. No help. But she still had herself. And that, she began to realize, was enough to survive. Maybe not to live yet, but to survive. One night, while scrubbing blood from a patient's gown in the laundry room, she overheard two nurses talking. "I'm telling you, she runs her own shop now. Started with nothing. Online stuff. Handmade things. Now she's pulling in real money." The other nurse laughed. "Wish I could do that. But I'm too tired after these shifts." The first one replied, "So was she. But she did it anyway." That conversation clung to her all night. When she got home, she sat on her old laptop, cracked screen flickering, and searched for stories, real stories, of women who built something from nothing. Etsy shops. Cleaning businesses. Homemade candles. Tutoring services. She read until her eyes burned. But something inside her had lit. For the first time in a long while, she felt a whisper of possibility. It wasn't a plan yet. It wasn't money in her hand. But it was a seed. A seed planted not out of hope for him to come back, but out of belief that she could build something for herself. Something he would never get credit for. She didn't quit her job. Not yet. But she started saving every extra dollar. No more coffee runs. No small treats. Every cent went into a small jar she kept hidden in the back of her closet. A jar she named Freedom. She didn't know what it would buy yet. Maybe supplies. Maybe a course. Maybe rent for one more month while she chased an idea. But it was hers. Untouched by anyone else's decisions, and slowly, with each shift she survived, each meal she skipped, each dollar she tucked away, she stopped thinking about him. He became a shadow. A chapter she didn't reread. And in that emptiness he left, she was quietly, painfully, building the foundation of something she hadn't felt in years: control. The kind that comes not from power, but from endurance. The kind that doesn't show on your face, but in your choices. She didn't feel like a survivor yet. But she was becoming one. It began with a notebook. Not a fancy one, just a worn spiral-bound notebook with a few bent pages and a tear on the cover. She found it buried under a pile of old receipts and unpaid bills, something she once used to write grocery lists and budget plans with him, back when they still believed things would get better. Now it had a new purpose. She opened the first page, clicked her pen with a quiet sense of purpose, and wrote at the top, "What I'm good at." She sat there, tapping the pen against her lips, staring at the page for almost 10 minutes before she started to write. Not because she didn't have anything to put down, but because for the first time, she was asking herself what she could do, not for someone else, not as a favor, not as part of surviving, but for her own future. Slowly, the words began to appear. I can cook. I can listen. I know how to care for people. I've got patience. I can sew. I fix things. I learn fast. I don't quit. That last one hit her harder than she expected. She read it twice and underlined it. I don't quit. The next day, she walked to the dollar store after her shift. She bought a few small jars, some craft materials, a bag of rice, and a pack of cinnamon sticks. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She stayed up late into the night in her tiny kitchen, mixing things, experimenting. She didn't even really know what she was doing, just testing out ideas she'd seen online. DIY air fresheners, homemade scented sachets, hand-sewn eye masks. Things people might buy for a few dollars, things that smelled like comfort. Her fingers ached from sewing and twisting twine. Her back hurt from standing on her feet for 16 hours straight. But her heart? Her heart felt alive again. She signed up for a free seller's account online. Took photos of her creations with her old phone under the dim kitchen light. She wrote each product description with honesty and care, explaining every detail as if someone out there might read it and feel a little bit of what she was feeling, hope mixed with fear, and the desperate need for change. The first week, no one bought anything. Not a single click. But she didn't stop. She kept uploading, kept learning. She watched videos on product marketing during her lunch breaks at the nursing home. Read blog posts on pricing, branding, packaging, everything that could help her turn her small jars and stitched cloths into something more than a hobby. On the 12th day, she got a notification. "You've made a sale." It was a tiny sachet filled with lavender and dry rice, wrapped in recycled cloth she stitched by hand. It sold for $4.75. She stared at the screen in disbelief, tears springing to her eyes. It wasn't about the money, it was about the proof. Someone, somewhere, had bought something she made. Something born from her hands and her stubborn will. And that was enough to keep going. The orders didn't flood in. They trickled, slow and small. But each one brought a new kind of joy, like bricks laying the foundation of a house only she could see. She used her weekends to create new items, test new scents, design simple packaging with leftover ribbon and recycled paper. She wrote handwritten thank you notes to every customer, sealing them with care. Sometimes she worked until dawn, her eyes heavy but her heart awake. The nursing home job still paid the bills, but this gave her soul oxygen. She kept her side business a secret. Not out of shame, but because it was sacred. It was hers, untouched by the world that had failed her. Some nights, when the orders were too few, doubt crept in like a cold draft. She'd look at her dwindling jar of saved coins and wonder if she was chasing another dream that would leave her empty. She'd hear his voice in her head, the way he used to talk about her being too soft, too slow, too simple to understand business. And for a moment, she'd believe him. But then she'd look around, at the stacks of neatly wrapped items, at the tiny list of happy customer reviews, and she'd remember. "I don't quit." The moment that changed everything came on a rainy afternoon. She had just finished folding laundry at the home and was heading out the back door when she saw a woman struggling to lift a heavy bag into her trunk. Without thinking, she rushed over to help. The woman, grateful, introduced herself as a manager at a boutique nearby. They talked briefly, and she mentioned her homemade items. The woman took interest, gave her a card, and asked her to stop by with samples. Her hands shook as she packed her best work into a small box. Later that night, wrapping each item like it was priceless, she visited the boutique that weekend. The woman smiled as she examined her pieces, took a deep breath of the lavender sachets, and said, "These are beautiful. We'd love to stock a few on our shelf. Let's start with 20. Her knees almost buckled. 20. Not 1. Not 2. 20. It felt like a mountain moved. She left that store with empty hands and a full heart. As she walked home in the drizzle, her shoes soaked, she smiled for the first time in months without pain behind it. She still lived in the same small apartment. Still worked the same hard job. Still came home to silence. But now, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like space. Space she could fill with her own voice. Her own dreams. Her own business. What began as survival was turning into growth. And what he left behind was starting to look like a beginning instead of an end. The boutique order changed everything. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was validation. It was the world looking at her and finally saying, "You're worth something." She poured herself into those 20 pieces like they were the last things she'd ever create. Each sachet was stitched with flawless edges, each jar filled with perfect balance, each tag hand-lettered with care. She worked late into the night for days, pushing her aching fingers past exhaustion. She still had her job at the nursing home, still worked back-to-back shifts, still came home bone-tired. But now, when she came home, she had a reason to keep going. The boutique sold out of her products in a week. They called her back, asking for 30 more. Then 50. Then asked if she could prepare a holiday collection. She had no clue how to scale, no business degree, no connections, no backup. But she had something else, unshakable resolve. So she said yes. And then she figured it out. She started using every free minute between shifts to plan. She watched free business tutorials on YouTube while folding towels. She scribbled marketing strategies in the break room during her 10-minute coffee breaks. Her phone became her office, her notes app filled with ideas, supplier contacts, price breakdowns, and customer feedback. She learned about cost margins, product photography, and local licensing laws, all while wearing scrubs and nursing bruised knees. There were days she forgot to eat. Nights when her eyes wouldn't stay open long enough to finish labeling a batch. But she never stopped. Not even once. Because for the first time in years, her life was moving. Not fast. Not easy. But forward, with the boutique sales growing, she knew she needed to step out of the shadows. She created a brand name, something simple, something personal. Second Light. It meant a lot to her. A reminder that even after being left in the dark, she found a way to reignite something inside. She paid a local artist a small fee to design a basic logo. She printed her own stickers at home, cut them out by hand, and stuck them on every product with a mix of pride and disbelief. Her little side hustle was starting to look like a real business. Word of mouth spread. Boutique customers started messaging her directly. Then came an email from a local event coordinator asking if she wanted to set up a booth at a weekend market. She hesitated. She had never done anything like that. She didn't even know how to set up a booth. But her hands typed, "Yes, I'd love to," before her brain could talk her out of it. She spent her savings on a folding table, a cheap tablecloth, and enough raw materials to make 50 products. She pulled an all-nighter the day before the event, cutting, sewing, filling jars and bags until her hands were numb and her eyes bloodshot. But when she set up that booth the next morning, watching people walk by and stop to smell her lavender and peppermint blends, something opened inside her. She wasn't invisible anymore. People saw her. They smiled, asked questions, paid cash. One woman said, "You've got a gift. Keep going." That small booth earned her more in one weekend than 2 weeks at the nursing home. She still didn't quit her job, not yet. Stability was something she couldn't risk. But she cut her hours just slightly, giving herself more time to build. She used the extra hours not to rest, but to research packaging vendors, test new product ideas, and deliver wholesale orders. Her evenings were filled with the hum of her old sewing machine, the scent of dried herbs and oils, and the soft sound of hope humming in her chest. She even began to dream again, not about love, not about him, but about independence. About walking into a bank one day and being addressed by her business name. About no longer being tied to someone else's decisions. The first time she made over $1,000 in a single month, she stared at her bank account for hours. Not because it was a lot, but because it was hers. Not borrowed. Not given. Not tied to a man's name. Just hers. The girl he abandoned was gone now. In her place was a woman who didn't just survive, she built. A woman who no longer looked at life from the floor. She was standing tall now, even if no one was clapping. Even if no one knew the nights she cried quietly, terrified it would all fall apart. Even if she still walked past the bedroom he used to sleep in and sometimes felt a pang. Even then, she moved forward, but there were moments, late at night, when she wondered what she would say if she ever saw him again. Would she feel rage? Sadness? Pity? Or would she feel nothing at all? She didn't know. And maybe it didn't matter. Because the life she was creating now had no space for ghosts. Only for growth. One quiet Sunday, she sat at her tiny kitchen table with her growing stack of order slips and invoices. The sunlight fell across her hands, revealing tiny scars from scissors and needles. She ran her fingers over them, smiling softly. These were the marks of her new life, earned with sweat and resilience. She thought back to the day he left, the way he closed the door like she was a burden he couldn't wait to shed. She remembered standing there, barefoot on the cold tiles, wondering how she'd go on. And now here she was, still in the same apartment, but a completely different woman. She had climbed out of the hole he left her in, not by begging or chasing him, but by building each step herself. Quietly. Slowly. Without anyone's help. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew, he had given her nothing. But in leaving, he had gifted her the one thing she never would have found if he had stayed, her own power. He had everything he thought he wanted, on paper, at least. A high-rise condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. A car that purred with every acceleration. A closet full of suits tailored to perfection. His days were filled with investor meetings, expensive dinners, and handshakes that smelled of polished ambition. He spoke in numbers, predicted market trends with confidence, and earned nods of approval from men twice his age. He had made it, at least according to the version of success he used to fantasize about while staring at the cracked ceiling of that small apartment he once shared with her. But for all the sparkle surrounding his life, there was something hollow underneath. Something he didn't talk about. Something he couldn't name. In the beginning, it had felt like escaping. Leaving behind poverty, struggle, and the constant burden of a love that demanded too much patience. He remembered convincing himself that she was the weight holding him back. That if he could just break free from her, from the life of counting pennies and dreams that moved like molasses, then everything would unlock. And for a while, it did. The investors did come. The deals did close. The money did flow. But so did the emptiness. It seeped in slowly, like fog rolling into a valley, until one day he realized he couldn't see anything clearly anymore. That he went through relationships like they were business transactions. Dinners, gifts, promises. But the moment someone showed too much softness, too much expectation, he pulled away. None of them made him feel the way she had, not in comfort, not in conflict. She had believed in him before he had anything, and that kind of love couldn't be replicated with wealth or attraction. Still, he buried those thoughts. Pushed them down beneath ambition. Every now and then, though, something would trigger a memory, a scent, a song, the soft sound of someone laughing like she used to, and his heart would ache with something he didn't want to name. That he had grown used to shallow applause. People respected his success, envied his lifestyle, but no one really knew him. They didn't know how often he walked into his condo and felt the silence weigh on him like guilt. They didn't know how often he scrolled through old photos on an outdated drive he hadn't thrown away, stopping on the blurry ones of her holding a homemade cake or laughing with her eyes closed. He told himself it was just nostalgia. That it didn't mean anything. But that lie was wearing thin. One afternoon, while waiting for a flight at the airport lounge, he found himself watching a documentary about women entrepreneurs. It wasn't something he would normally pay attention to, but a particular story caught his attention, a woman who had started a business from her kitchen table, using nothing but recycled materials and grit. As the camera zoomed in on the small workshop and the stacks of handmade products, something about it felt eerily familiar. The voice narrating her journey spoke with such clarity and humility, and the images of the tiny scented jars and stitched sachets pulled at him with a quiet force. He leaned in closer. His jaw clenched. The narrator said her name. Her name. For a second, he forgot where he was. The sounds around him faded. Her name echoed in his chest like a bell tolling from the past. He stared at the screen, eyes scanning every detail. The products. The packaging. Her photo. She was older now, sure. Her hair longer, her face more defined, but her eyes were the same, steady, unshaken. Her smile wasn't soft anymore, it was confident. Strong. It wasn't the smile of someone waiting for a man to come back. It was the smile of someone who had figured out how to win without him. His throat tightened. He felt exposed, like the entire room could see the shame rising inside him. He pulled out his phone, typed her name into the search bar, and there it was, her business, her story, her rise. Articles, interviews, product reviews. Photos of her shaking hands with boutique owners, standing behind colorful booths, laughing with employees. Employees. She had a team now. He sat back in his seat, heart pounding, mind spinning. She had done it. Without him. Without his help, his guidance, or his money. She had built a life, no, an empire, out of the ruins he left her in. He didn't know what to feel. A part of him was proud, even happy. But a bigger part burned with regret. Not because he missed her love, but because he had underestimated her so completely. He had looked into her eyes that night and decided she was weak. That she wouldn't make it without him. And now she stood taller than he ever had, on ground she built with her own hands. That night, back in his condo, he poured himself a drink and stared out at the city. But the lights felt dimmer, the silence louder. His phone buzzed with messages, calendar alerts, emails. He ignored them all. His thoughts were somewhere else, back in that kitchen where he once said goodbye, back in the quiet strength of a woman he had walked away from because he couldn't see her power. And now, all these years later, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He wondered if she still remembered him. If she ever thought about the day he left. Did she hate him? Did she laugh at him now? Or had she erased him from her life like he had never mattered at all? That last possibility hurt the most. Because while she had moved on, he had been living inside a hollow version of success, haunted by a choice that looked smart on paper but felt like a mistake in his soul. He closed his eyes and imagined her face, not the broken one he left behind, but the one he saw on that screen, steady and glowing with quiet power. And for the first time in years, he felt something break inside him. Not loudly. Not all at once. But like a crack running through the center of a polished statue. He had the money, the suits, the view, but she had something he couldn't buy. Something he couldn't reclaim. She had peace. And now he knew what it cost him to lose it. It was never part of her plan to see him again. She hadn't prepared for it, hadn't imagined what she'd say or how she'd feel. The truth was, after all these years, he had faded into something more like a memory than a man. Not gone, not forgotten, but no longer central. She had built a new life that didn't revolve around his choices. Her success wasn't a response to him, it was a reward for herself. But life doesn't always respect the lines we draw to keep the past out. Sometimes it just opens a door, casually and without warning, and lets the past walk right in. She had been invited to speak at a local entrepreneurship summit. It was a big step for her. Public speaking still made her stomach twist, but she said yes because she knew what it meant. It wasn't just about promoting her brand, it was about claiming space in a world that once ignored her. She wore a soft blue dress that made her feel grounded, her hair swept up, a touch of confidence in her walk. As she waited backstage, reviewing her notes, she felt proud. Nervous, but proud. She had come far from the woman who once stitched lavender sachets at a broken table under flickering lights. What she didn't know, what no one could have warned her, was that he would be in that audience. He hadn't come for her. He hadn't even known she would be speaking. He was there to network, to mingle with other business owners, to make a few connections and shake a few hands. When her name was announced, he looked up from his phone, unbothered at first. But as she stepped onto the stage and the spotlight touched her face, he froze. Everything around him, the chatter, the lights, the movement, blurred into silence. It was her. In the flesh. Not a photo. Not a memory. Her. She didn't see him at first. She was focused on her speech, her words flowing with warmth and precision. She spoke about failure, about starting small, about being overlooked and underestimated. Her voice was steady, her eyes scanning the crowd gently. And then, in the middle of a sentence, her gaze stopped. There he was. Sitting in the third row. Looking right at her. The breath caught in her throat, just for a split second. The audience didn't notice. But inside her chest, a thunderstorm began. She kept speaking. She finished her talk, answering a few questions, smiling through it all. But something in her had shifted. She hadn't prepared for this, not the sight of him, not the sudden rush of emotion that came with it. He looked older. Not in a tired way, but in a way that showed life had pressed on him too. His hair was neater, his posture rigid. But his eyes hadn't changed. Still full of fire, still trying to figure out the world like a puzzle with missing pieces. He clapped when she finished. Not out of politeness, but something closer to disbelief. After the session, she stepped away from the crowd and found a quiet hallway to breathe. Her heart was pounding. She wasn't angry. Not exactly. She wasn't afraid. But she wasn't calm either. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want drama. She just wanted a moment to gather herself. And then she heard the footsteps. Slow, hesitant, and too familiar. She turned before he spoke. That he stood a few feet away, unsure of what to say. The man who once walked out with so much certainty now looked like a boy again, lost and reaching. "Hi," he said, voice low. She said nothing. Just looked at him. Her face was unreadable. Not cold, not welcoming, simply still. He tried again. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her response was quiet but firm. "That makes two of us." He gave a faint, awkward smile. "You were incredible up there." "I had no idea you." She stopped him with a glance. "No. You didn't. You never did." There was a long pause. The kind of pause that stretches far beyond sound, heavy with everything left unsaid. He shifted his weight. "I don't even know where to begin." She tilted her head slightly, not unkindly. "Then don't." He swallowed hard. "I've thought about you. A lot." She let the silence hang. "Do you want to apologize?" she asked, not with accusation, but with calm curiosity. He hesitated. "Yes. I do. I should have never left like that. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I needed to escape to build something better, but," she raised a hand. "You don't owe me reasons. You made a choice. I lived with the consequences. That part's done." He nodded slowly, unsure if he should stay or leave. "You've built something amazing," he said. "I'm proud of you." She smiled then, a soft, knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't build it for your pride." That stung, and he knew he deserved it. I didn't know you had this in you." She looked at him fully now, her voice gentle but firm. "That's the thing. You never looked close enough to see what I had in me. And that's why you lost me." He took a breath, ready to say something else, but she took a step back. "This moment right here," she said, "this is closure. Not a new beginning. I don't hate you. I don't even regret what happened. You were a lesson. A hard one. But a necessary one." He nodded, eyes heavy. "Can I ask you one thing?" She waited. "Are you happy?" She looked away for a moment, then back at him. "I'm not just happy. I'm at peace." And with that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, each step a quiet declaration that she was never going to be the woman he left behind again. That he stood there for a long time after she disappeared around the corner. People walked past him, conversations buzzing, the event rolling on. But for him, everything had paused. He had just come face to face with the strongest version of the woman he once abandoned. And now he knew, he hadn't just left behind a love. He had left behind greatness. He couldn't sleep that night. No matter how many times he closed his eyes, her face kept appearing in the dark. Not the face he remembered from the past, the tired eyes, the soft concern, the quiet devotion, but the face from the summit. Focused, composed, powerful. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't tried to hurt him, hadn't thrown his betrayal back at him like he half expected. She didn't need to. Her strength wasn't in her words, it was in her calm. That kind of stillness comes from knowing who you are and what you've overcome. And that was what cut the deepest. She didn't need anything from him. Not closure. Not validation. Not even forgiveness. Her life had moved on. Without him. And he was just now realizing that he had never truly moved forward at all. For the next few days, her voice echoed in his head. The way she said, "I'm at peace," haunted him more than if she had screamed. He kept thinking about the moment their eyes met for the first time after all those years. It had hit him like a wave, 1,000 memories crashing down all at once. Her laugh in that tiny kitchen, the way she used to hum while stirring lentils, her late-night whispers of encouragement when he thought everything was falling apart. She had been the steady beat in his chaos, the quiet force behind his early confidence. And he had walked away from it like it was disposable. Like she was. His life, as perfect as it looked from the outside, suddenly felt cold. Empty in ways he hadn't let himself feel until now. He wandered through his own apartment like a stranger, staring at furniture he didn't care about, books he never read, artwork chosen by a decorator, not by him. He opened his fridge and found nothing but bottled water, protein shakes, and packaged meals. No warmth. No life. No scent of home. It hit him then, he had spent years building a shell, not a life. A shell full of expensive things and empty evenings. And in all that time, he had been too proud to admit that the version of himself he had become was not the man he truly wanted to be. He started rereading their old messages, the ones from years ago, still stored in an old email account he never deleted. There were long paragraphs from her, filled with love and belief and dreams they once shared. And his responses? Short. Dismissive. Often distracted. He had always thought he was the ambitious one, the visionary. But now he saw it clearly, she had been the one with real resilience, real heart. He had confused her gentleness for weakness. And he'd mistaken his selfishness for courage. On impulse, he drove past the neighborhood where they once lived. The apartment building was still there, though the paint had peeled and the steps creaked. He sat across the street in his car for nearly an hour, just staring at it. Remembering the night he left. The silence. Her bare feet on the cold kitchen floor. He hadn't looked back then. He hadn't allowed himself to. Now, he couldn't stop looking. The next day, he found himself searching for her store. It wasn't hard, her business had grown since the last time he checked. She had multiple locations now, a polished website, press features. He walked into one of her boutique shops quietly, almost nervously. The store was warm, filled with the scent of herbs and essential oils. Customers browsed softly lit shelves of handmade goods, each one beautifully packaged and labeled. There was a display of founders' favorites near the front, and he recognized some of the items. Lavender sachets. Peppermint jars. It was all so familiar, yet so elevated that he stood still for a moment, overwhelmed. A young employee approached him with a smile, asking if he needed help. He shook his head politely and whispered, "No, just looking." But he wasn't just looking. He was absorbing. Witnessing. The atmosphere she had created here wasn't just about products. It was about healing. About warmth. About something real. Something honest. And in that moment, he realized why he felt so hollow for so long. He had spent years chasing status, but she had built substance that he walked out without buying anything. Not because he didn't want to, but because he felt like he didn't deserve to. He had been a ghost in her story for too long. He didn't want to become a shadow in her shop. That evening, he sat in his condo and stared out at the skyline, thinking not about buildings or success or numbers, but about her journey. She hadn't just survived, she had created. Not from revenge. Not to prove a point. But from a place of quiet strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. He began to write. Not a business plan, not a pitch. Just thoughts. Feelings. A letter to her that he would probably never send. He wrote about the things he wished he had said years ago. The things he had only now begun to understand. He wrote about the man he was then, the one who ran, and the man he wanted to become now. He wrote about how seeing her again broke him open, in the best way. How it made him confront everything he had avoided for years. And how, above all, he was sorry. Not just for leaving. But for never really seeing her when he had the chance. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Maybe one day he'd send it. Maybe not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, he was finally telling the truth. To himself. About her. About what he lost. About what he could never get back. And though regret would always live somewhere inside him, something else had started growing too, a desire to change, not for applause, not to win her back, but because he finally understood what it meant to be a man. And it had nothing to do with money, or status, or escape. It had everything to do with staying. With seeing. With choosing to be better, even when no one's watching. She didn't look for him after the summit. She didn't expect to. That moment in the hallway had closed a door that had once haunted her. She had walked away not out of anger, but with the peaceful certainty that she had nothing left to prove to him or to the past they shared. Her life had become something else entirely, built with quiet hands and years of relentless perseverance. Her days were full now, staff meetings, product development, charity collaborations, and community events. She had become more than just a business owner. She had become a figure of inspiration in her city, a woman whose story people whispered about with admiration. They didn't know the full truth, of course. Not all of it. But they knew enough to respect her journey. Enough to understand that her success was born from something deep, something unbreakable. And though she rarely thought about him anymore, she couldn't deny that his absence had been the first painful step toward her becoming everything she was now. Winter was settling in again. The streets glowed with string lights, and her store buzzed with customers buying gifts, placing holiday orders, and sharing laughter. She liked this time of year, the warmth, the scents, the feeling of completion. She had just finished a long meeting with her team when her assistant handed her a sealed envelope. "A courier dropped this off," she said. "No return address. No logo. Just her name on the front, handwritten." She opened it slowly, curious, cautious. And when she unfolded the letter inside, her breath paused. It was his handwriting. She sat down, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. The letter was long, sincere, and heavy with emotion. He had written everything he couldn't say during their brief encounter. How much he admired her strength. How deeply he regretted leaving her. How he had failed not just her, but himself. He didn't beg for forgiveness, didn't ask for a second chance. He simply told the truth, the painful, raw truth of a man who finally saw the cost of his decisions. And at the bottom, in small, almost trembling words, he wrote, "I hope you found peace. I hope you know you deserved better. And I hope, wherever life takes you next, you never forget how powerful you truly are." She stared at the letter for a long time. No tears came. No surge of anger. Just a strange, full silence inside her chest. It was as if a final weight had lifted. Not because he had apologized, but because she realized that she no longer needed it. She had outgrown the pain. Outgrown the version of herself that had waited for his return. She had closed that chapter long ago. This was just the last page finally turning on its own. She folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box she kept in her closet, along with a few items from the old days. Not out of nostalgia, but out of respect, for the woman she used to be, for the pain she endured, and for the resilience that rose from it. That woman had been broken and left behind, but she had not stayed down. She had stood up and walked forward, step by agonizing step, until the future was something she created, not something she waited for. Weeks passed. The holidays came and went. The letter faded into the background of her busy days, tucked away like a memory that no longer hurt. She continued growing her business, expanding into new markets, mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded her of the girl she once was. She launched a foundation for women in crisis, funding small startups, shelter programs, and training workshops. Every time she saw one of those women succeed, it healed a small piece of her former self, and then, one spring afternoon, she stood in the middle of her third store's grand opening. The ribbon had just been cut, cameras were flashing, and the crowd was applauding. She looked around, smiling with a calm that only comes after years of storms. Among the crowd, she saw faces she didn't know, employees she now trusted, and supporters who had walked beside her journey. And for a split second, her eyes caught a familiar figure standing in the distance, just outside the crowd. He didn't wave. Didn't approach. Just stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching quietly. His face was older, more worn, but his expression held no pride, no guilt, only quiet recognition. A look that said, "I see you now." She met his gaze, nodded once, soft, firm, and turned away to greet her team. She didn't look back. That moment, brief as it was, felt like the last thread tying her to the life she had once fought to hold together. It didn't hurt anymore. It didn't sting. It simply was. A chapter of her story, now closed. She walked into the store, surrounded by the scent of her success, peppermint, lavender, cedarwood. Everything she had built was real. She had loved. She had lost. And she had risen, not in spite of it, but because of it. Later that night, sitting alone in her quiet home, she thought about how far she had come. Not just in distance from the man who left her, but in the distance she had traveled within herself. She no longer needed someone to tell her she mattered. She no longer needed apologies or recognition. She was whole. She had built a life brick by brick, tier by tier, and it belonged to her entirely, and somewhere in the city, he was likely sitting in his high-rise again, watching the night go by, remembering the woman he once left behind. Only now, he knew, she wasn't the one who lost. She had become everything he never believed she could be. And he had become the man who would always wonder what might have been if he had only stayed. But she didn't wonder anymore. She had stopped wondering the day she chose herself. The day she realized that real power doesn't come from who stays or who leaves, it comes from what you choose to do when you're standing alone, with nothing but your pain and your will to rise, and she had risen. Beyond survival. Beyond bitterness. Into something solid. Something sacred. Something unstoppable.